been using sermon series for the past 13 weeks, if you can believe it. It's been that long. We did 4 weeks on what it means to be a family, and we did 9 weeks on the fruit of the Spirit. And those sermon series, for me, they've been fun, and it's been helpful. It keeps us on a certain path. And I've personally learned a lot. I hope you guys have learned half as much as I have trying to get ready for those sermons. And we're working on new sermon series that we'll be able to start soon, I hope. But not for today. Today we go back to the way we've always done things, back to the way that I've always done things. We have the readings that are chosen for us. They're part of something called a lectionary system. And a lectionary is a 3-year series of readings that kind of goes through the Bible in 3 years, through the Old Testament and the New Testament, and then the gospel has a different focus in each of those 3 years. So it'll focus more on one or the other of the gospels, even though it bounces around a little bit. So for 10 years, that's how I got my sermon material. That's how I knew what the reading was. That's how that picked. So I thought, okay, the series have been fun, but now I go back to the way that I'm used to doing things for 10 years, so that's got to be really comfortable for me. I was expecting this to be a nice, easy transition back after being gone for a couple weeks, and boy, was I ever wrong. Did you listen to the gospel reading today? Did you hear it? It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. One line sums the whole thing up. Listen to this, and you tell me how to make sense out of this line. And I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they will welcome you into the eternal homes. Seriously? What does that even mean? Wow. I read it over and over again. I realize you just sat here and you've had to hear it. I read it over and over and over again, trying to find something in there, and I just got more and more confused. So I thought, okay, this is good stuff. I was tempted for a second to actually use the Old Testament or the epistle reading for my sermon, but by then I had gotten a little bit, I was dogged. I was going to figure this thing out if it was the last thing I did. So I decided I'm going to go into my vast library and I'm going to look at what all the scholars have said about this text. Somebody way smarter than me, they figured out what this means, and I'll just go read and they'll be able to help me out. Well, let me tell you some of the stuff that I found when I first started looking. The first person, the one I can usually count on every time, this is what he had to say about it. He said, Jesus' words here are completely baffling. That was nice. My second choice said, parables are meant to be confusing, but this is the most confusing of all. And my third try was, Jesus' parables are generally strange, but the one found in Luke 16, 1 through 13, seems to be a $3 bill. So that was awesome. And so I was stuck, really, really struggling. For 4 or 5 solid days, I read and reread. I studied, I pulled out dusty old books that I haven't looked at in who knows how long. I prayed, I meditated, I prayed some more, and then prayed some more. And believe it or not, about 5 or 6 o'clock on Friday night, I finally had, I think, a little bit of a breakthrough, and I think I have at least a little bit of what God is trying to get at in this story. It's helpful to remember what leads up to the story, what's going on in the life of Jesus and the life of the apostles as this story comes along. Jesus has been out healing and freely giving away forgiveness, freely to anybody, and the authorities aren't very happy about it. The other rabbis are not very happy about it. In fact, they were enraged. They wanted him dead. They didn't mind the healings so much as long as he did them the proper way at the proper time. They didn't like it when he did that on the Sabbath day, but boy, the nerve of him forgiving sins just willy-nilly, that really was getting to them. So what I think this story is, this story of the rogue manager, what I think it is, I think most likely it's a picture of Jesus and the way that he completely mismanaged his responsibility as a rabbi. The responsibilities of the rabbi, one of the main responsibilities was to mediate God's justice and carefully offer forgiveness only after appropriate evidence that forgiveness was warranted has been given. And only then after some proof that the law had been fulfilled. So in other words, if you wanted to go to a rabbi and be forgiven for something, first of all, you had to prove that you were worth forgiveness, that you had done something to show that you were worthy of forgiving. And then there was some price to pay, right? You had to make an offering. You had to make a sacrifice. There was some payment that then had to happen. And then, and only then, could you be forgiven of sins. So I believe that the manager in our story, his crazy and irresponsible behavior is a description of the outrageous divine generosity that is squandered on each one of us. One of today's primary criticisms of Jesus would probably be that he is just dispensing cheap grace. Do you know, Jesus healed 10 lepers. Remember the story of him healing 10 lepers? He didn't even take the time to find out why it was that they got leprosy. That was the least he could have done, right? I mean, everybody knows that the reason that they had leprosy was because they did something wrong. At least back then, that's what they thought. Jesus didn't even take time to figure out what they had done or what their mothers had done while they were in the womb, because this was another thing. If your child was born that way, then it was because the mother had sinned grievously while the child was still in the womb. He didn't even try to figure it out. He just forgave them. He forgave the Samaritan woman at the well, a Samaritan. Just forgave her. She was bad too. He just forgave her. The woman that was caught in adultery, he just told her, go and sin no more. There was no proof that she had done anything better. There was no proof that she wasn't going to do it again or that she'd learned her lesson. He just forgave her. All he asked when he forgave these people was to take up your cross and follow me. I think what this story, this parable is pointing us to is our real purpose as a church. And I believe with every part of my being that our real purpose as a church is to train and nurture every follower of Jesus as rogue agents of God's radical and outrageous generosity. I think we're supposed to be like the loopy manager. I mean, seriously, outrageous generosity. Like going out on the streets and giving away forgiveness. Giving away membership in the body, membership in the family. Giving away healing, giving away salvation. In John's Gospel, he said, if you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. Or John writes about Jesus saying, actually, if you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained. What if all the other concerns that plague organized religion became secondary to that one idea? I believe that Jesus comes to us in this parable to convince us that God longs more than anything else for us to be reconciled to him. That he wants more than anything else for us to be set free, to forgive, and to love, and to be made whole. And really, if you think about it that way, it's no wonder that Jesus' actions so infuriated his peers. He had marked down the fee for divine forgiveness so much that it was affordable to anybody. And it was readily accessible. Can you imagine what this world would be like if we all got together and started to freely forgive each other the way that this story talks about? Can you imagine the difference in this building? And I'm telling you, if there was a big difference in this building, because we've decided to radically and frankly kind of crazily just forgive each other, man, it would be a huge difference. And if there was a huge difference just in this building, imagine the difference in this community. And if it was a difference in this community, imagine the difference in Western New York. And if you can imagine the difference in Western New York, imagine the difference in the entire Northeast. And pretty soon the entire United States, and pretty soon the entire world. That's what God's talking about. Jesus today holds out an invitation to us. It's a 2,000-year-old invitation. And that invitation says, if you forgive somebody of their sins are forgiven. It doesn't matter if they repent. It doesn't matter if they deserve it. It doesn't matter if they're Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or atheist or anything else. It doesn't matter whether they're male or female or black or white or yellow or red. If you forgive anybody their sins are forgiven. That's not me telling you that. I'm telling you that's what Jesus said. And if you choose to retain their sins are retained. I don't know about you, but to me that sounds like a dare. I think Jesus is daring us. He's holding out that 2,000-year-old invitation, and he's daring us to go out and be lavish with his love and with his grace and with his forgiveness, and just give it away. And he's saying, watch how my world will be restored. Watch how creation will be reconciled to me if you just say yes to this invitation that I'm holding out to you. And as you consider whether to grab hold of that invitation, I want you to imagine for just a moment that great cloud of witnesses that surround us, that are cheering for us, that are watching with bated breath, just hoping that we'll say yes to that 2,000-year-old invitation. What about you? Are you willing to become an agent, a rogue, squandering agent of God's lavish and free and bottomless grace and healing and forgiveness? I'll warn you before you say yes that if you do, your world will never be the same. Our world will never be the same. Would you please bow your heads and pray with me? Gracious God, birth in us a new courage to give away the very best of what you offer us. Be patient with us as we learn how to empty ourselves of our fears and protectiveness. Breathe into us new life, new courage, new generosity, and even new daring, so that with every one of our breaths we can say yes to you. Into your hands we commend our spirits. Amen.